Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Tech Forum session. I'm Monique Monjon, one of the project managers at BookNet Canada. Welcome to How to Make Accessible eBooks, a workshop for beginners. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge today the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on, an acknowledgement that is deeply personal due to this virtual platform and the wide range of locations people are joining from today. Today, I am broadcasting from the traditional territories of the original nations of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Indigenous peoples. I encourage you to check out nativeland.ca to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining us from this afternoon. BookNet Canada endorses the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space making in the publishing industry. In spirit of that acknowledgement, I confirm our responsibility in mending the sacred hoop with Canada's Indigenous peoples, to be an ally to all Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and to unite and work alongside one another. Lastly, we'd like to remind attendees of the Code of Conduct. Please do be kind, be inclusive, be respectful of others, including of their privacy. Be aware of your words and actions, and please report any violations of our Code of Conduct to techforum@booknetcanada.ca. Do not harass speakers, hosts, facilitators, or attendees, or record these sessions. We have a zero tolerance policy. You can find the entire Code of Conduct at techforum.booknetcanada.ca/code of conduct. Now, let me introduce our speaker, Laura Brady. Laura is an accessibility expert whose priority is always to put users first. For the past 15 years, she has worked in digital publishing, creating and converting ebooks, training publishers on accessible workflows, writing a blog helping developers work more accessibly, and consulting for service organizations about how to publish inclusively while worrying about everyone's reading experience. A sought-after consultant, trainer, and public speaker, Laura advocates with government funders, accessible library organizations, and publisher associations for disability issues. Laura is also active at sharing knowledge, building communities, and calling stakeholders in throughout community groups like #eProduction, the Accessible Publishing Summit, and eBook Craft, in addition to serving on the eBound and Accessible Books Consortium's board of directors. In her free time, if you can imagine she has any, after all of those things, Laura reads books and loves dogs. She has not mastered doing both at once, but I'm sure she will in time. We also wanted to thank our facilitators who are joining us today to help out in the breakout rooms and share their knowledge and expertise. They are Leah Brochu from the Accessible Publishing and Resources Coordinator at the National Network for Equitable Library Service, Rachel Ozelin, Production Coordinator at the National Network for Equitable Library Service, Nicole Lamb, the Production Coordinator at House of Anansi Press, Vlad Kristash, the Project Manager at Kurtejevic Publishing, Janine Jeffers, an Accessible Content Certifier at eBound, and Adobe Nanobi, also an Accessible Content Certifier at eBound and BookNet Canada's Marketing and Research Associate. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to turn things over to Laura. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Monique, and thank you everyone for being here. It's an intimidating number of people with a wide breadth of knowledge that I'm aware of. So I hope you won't be too bored or too overwhelmed and that we'll hit the middle of the road nicely. A quick note before we get underway. If I'm using technical terms that you're not familiar with, or I'm using an acronym in a really flip way that you don't know what it is, please speak up in the chat and we will explain it. You have to get something out of this, and if we're losing you in the first session, then that's my fault and it's a problem, and I need to know about it so I can correct for it. Okay, so I'm going to start super basic, and talk about the structure of an EPUB. The EPUB format is currently at the 3.2 iteration, and it is essentially, so this is the slide on the screen now is a screenshot from Oxygen, and it's showing what's inside of an Epub. It shows all the folders and they're all unfolded so you can see what's going on in them. So an EPUB is a zip container, and it's essentially some styles and some content. So the CSS and the HTML zipped into a container with a few extra pieces that make it function on reading systems. It is, in essence, all the elements of, say, a website in an EPUB wrapper. You can actually change the suffix on an EPUB file to, say, booktitle.zip instead of booktitle.epub, and unzip the EPUB to see what's inside. I would caution against doing that, as there are a few more steps involved in zipping the book back together, so don't do that. It's just telling you that you can. Some text editors will open and close an EPUB without zipping and unzipping, like Oxygen and Sigil. But there are standalone scripts that will do this for you as well. So I'm just going to actually show you that process right now. Right here, you received a Word file with some things to download ahead of time, and one of them was eCan Crusher. It's a quick drag and drop script, which of course opened on my other screen. So it's right there. You can drag an EPUB over it and do that, and then, and then the folder landed on my other screen. So there's the folder. It just basically unfolds it. And if I open that, you can see everything that's inside of it. You could actually take out one of these pieces and edit it in a text editor of your choice, and then zip it back up. So you would just drag that right back over the icon and it would zip it back up. I'm going to just ignore that for now and then move into Oxygen. So there are a number of tools to use to edit EPUBs. I prefer Oxygen, but that's just a personal choice. We've recommended that you download Sigil, and this is how that Module 1 EPUB, which I hope you've retrieved from the Google Drive, how it looks in Sigil. There's a quick difference that I just want to point to here. In Oxygen, it opens up at the top level, and you can see the meta-INF folder and the MIME type. If you look over here, you can't see that in Sigil, so that's maybe a bit of an issue, and I just want to point you to that. If, for example, you're using Indesign to create EPUBs and you embed fonts, it will populate this meta-INF folder with an encryption file. And in some use cases, you want to delete that encryption file so that your fonts work as expected on Kindle. So just to let you know that if you don't have Oxygen, which is an expensive piece of software, and there's no need to use it if you're comfortable in Sigil, then you'll want to use this eCan Crusher to take that encryption file out and rezip. Okay, I'm gonna leave Oxygen open for a second. Okay, so when you open an EPUB, you'll see three things: the MIME type file, which is right down here, the meta-INF folder, and the OEBPS folder. An EPUB is composed of these three parts. The MIME type tells your computer what the archived file is. So let's just quickly open that so you can see it. It's that's all it is. It says application /EPUB plus zip. Very basic. And then the and then the container.xml. This is another very basic piece. In my experience, you never have to edit the container or the MIME type. I'm just explaining what they are and showing them to you, and then wipe them from your brain. You don't ever have to think of them again. There should be one HTML file. So here are the HTML files. These are the ones that are tagged blue. These are the bits of content. They basically are broken up at the chapter or section level, and that's where the content of the book is. There are two navigation files, the toc.ncx. What is going on here? There we go. And the toc.xhtml. These are both navigation files. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them in a second. They tell the reading engine how to navigate pages and are used to generate the table of contents. And then this very critical file right here called content.opf outlines the structure and the contents of your EPUB file. Okay, so the core content of any book is in the OEBPS folder. This is where the HTML files, often broken up by chapter, live. The style sheets are tucked away in the CSS folder. And fonts and images live in their own respective folders. I'm actually going to switch to Sigil now because this is what we're going to use during the course of this workshop, and I want you to be more familiar with how this looks. I just wanted you to see Oxygen to see those pieces that you're missing in Sigil. There are usually two navigation documents, the NCX and the nav is often called the toc.xhtml if a lot of authoring systems just call it that by default. The NCX is there for backwards compatibility with EPUB 2 reading systems. It is a fussy way of building navigation, and I don't pay a ton of attention to it anymore, especially as even Kindle is ingesting and preferring Epub 3 these days. Most reading systems pull the navigation from the nav document. It is essentially a series of lists from which reading systems pull information to guide a reader. So let's just open this right now. It's a little bit hard to see, but hopefully you can see that. It's just some lists. So there's the contents, and then if you scroll down a little bit more, there's landmarks. A lot of ebooks would have something else called a page list. More about that soon. There can also be other supplementary lists in this file, like lists of figures and illustrations, maps, etc. All right, I'm going to close that and navigate over to the content.opf. The open package format, or OPF file, is the engine of an ebook. It contains the metadata, the manifest, the spine, and the guide. The metadata element is required, although only minimal pieces are necessary for validation. And this is where all the basic descriptors of a book live. You can pack a lot into the metadata of an ebook, but don't confuse it for Onyx, which is where the real and variable descriptors of content should actually live. This is also where the accessibility metadata goes, and much more on that later. At minimum, the OPF metadata must have a title, author, and an identifier. So in this book, which is just a made-up book that I created, here's the title, Peter Pan, the creator, a date, the language, and the accessibility metadata is down here. This is an accessibility summary. So there's a whole bunch of little bits and pieces. Usually the DC identifier is something like an ISBN, but this is a made-up book, so it doesn't have an ISBN. And then we scroll a little bit down in this file. The next section is something called the manifest. The manifest is a list of everything in the OEBPS folder. All the HTML, all the styles, fonts, and images are listed individually. The architecture of each listing is predictable. So it starts out with item and an ID number, and then what the actual file is. So this is, in this case, 05_chapter1.xhtml, and then it says what media type it is, so HTML. If we go down to one of the images, you can see that it has the location, so it has the image folder and a backslash. That's the path to where the image sits. And the media type is an image/JPEG. The spine, which is the next section right down here, this is the spine. This tells the reading system the order of the HTML files and is listed by ID number. And then the final element in the OPF is something called the guide. The guide points to significant pieces of content, so cover, copyright, and start of content. I still use the guide, even though the guide is superseded now by landmarks, which live in the toc.xhtml. Most EPUB authoring tools will assemble the OPF for you. If you add or take away a piece, you may have to fiddle with the OPF. The one very nice thing about Sigil is that if you change something, if you change the name of a file over here, it will automatically rename it in your OPF. Other text editors like Oxygen don't do that for you, so just be aware of that. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my slides and talk about accessible HTML. Lauren, do you want to launch that poll about people's comfort with HTML? There we go. If you could all answer this poll, that would be grand. It would be really helpful to understand how well you understand HTML, especially as the first breakout room task is going to be structured around creating some HTML from scratch. So it looks like this is a healthy mix. So 35% of you are very familiar, 50% are somewhat familiar, and 13% are not familiar at all. So I promise you that there will be baby steps, and we will we'll get to see how that looks. And in the breakout rooms, if you need extra hand holding, you will get them. Okay. I need to move this poll so I can see what's going on. All right, accessible HTML. So at its root, HTML is accessible by nature. So let the HTML do the heavy lifting. Leverage this basic fact so that you are doing as little fancy footwork as possible. Using simple HTML is always the better and more elegant solution to any markup or accessibility issue. So the quote on the screen is from Matt Garish's book, Accessible EPUB 3, and I'll read it for people who can't see it. When ebooks contain only generalized structures, reading systems are limited to presenting only the basic visual form of the book. Dumb data makes for dumb reading experiences, as reading systems cannot play the necessary role of facilitator when given little to nothing to work with. And that's why not everyone can read all digital content. And so one of the things that that the author is getting at here is that HTML can convey some things to the reading system, like it can tell the reading system, hey, this is a header. Hey, this is a paragraph, and here's a block quote. Here's some italics, etc. The semantically meaningless div and span soup that comes out of some authoring environments will fail to present as expected in some reading environments and will actually interfere actively with the reading experience for some users. So let's step back and talk about what HTML is for a hot minute. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the code that is used to structure a web page and or an ebook and its content. For example, content could be structured within a set of paragraphs, a list of bulleted points, or using images and data tables. HTML is a markup language that defines the structure of your content. HTML consists of a series of elements which you use to enclose or wrap different parts of the content to make it appear a certain way or act a certain way. And the enclosing tags can make a word or an image hyperlink to somewhere else. I'm just going to switch to the next screen. Wait, I went one too fast. There we go. So this is the anatomy of an HTML element. The image is a screenshot from the Mozilla Developer Network, and it shows an opening P tag with the class equals, in quotes, nice, and then some plain text called that's hello world. That's the enclosed text content, and then a closing P tag. There's an open tag, an attribute and its value. So the class equals nice is the attribute and its value, the enclosed text content, and then the closing tag. This is the real basic architecture of HTML. The entire string is called an element. The items within the pointy brackets are the tags, etc. The structure and markup needs to follow this architecture exactly, or you will get validation errors. And a hot tip, when writing HTML, validate often so you don't lose track of where you made an error, especially as a newbie. Also consider using a text editor like Oxygen, which will redline markup errors as they happen. I'm just going to switch over to Oxygen and show you that. So here is some content. And if I delete this closing P tag at the end of line 21, see if I can make that bigger. Hope everyone can see that okay. If I delete that closing P tag, what happens is Oxygen says, oh my goodness, something's gone wrong here. This opening P tag is not allowed and something has happened. So I've got a validation error. If I put that closing P tag back in, then that redlining disappears. It's a pretty handy feature of Oxygen, to be honest, especially when you're new to HTML. All right, I've missed one again. My fingers keep going too fast. So what does this mean exactly? It means that you should always use the appropriate tag for the job. The most common tags are what's on your screen here, and I'm going to go through them really quickly. Headers should be tagged with H1, H2, H3, H4, all the way to H6. You have some breadth there of how you want to tag your headers. A P tag is for text, an HR tag is for editorial breaks. Block quote is for things that are block quoted. Figures are for images, and fig caption gets nested inside the figure tag, and it has the caption that goes along with the image. An aside is for sidebar content, including footnotes. A section is for chapters and subsections. I'm going to talk a lot more about italics, cite, bold, and strong tags in a minute, so let's just leave that aside for right now. An SUP tag is for superscript, a sub tag is for subscript, small is for small caps, a U is for underlined, ABBR is for abbreviation, and then OL and UL are for ordered lists and unordered lists. And then within those lists, you use an LI or list item tag to tag the various pieces of a bulleted or numbered list. The integrity of your content depends entirely on using the right element for the job. I can't emphasize this enough. Get yourself a reference book on HTML and CSS. I really like Liz Castro's HTML5 and CSS3, but I think it's out of print. The technology behind HTML and CSS hasn't changed in some time, so this book is still relevant, especially for newbies. I bet there are more up-to-date reference books out there, so do ping me if you find a better one. I'd love to hear about it. The slide on the screen now shows a quick chunk of HTML, and it shows you how it's constructed. And what I've done here is highlight in the same colors the opening and the closing tags of various bits and pieces. So there's an opening section tag highlighted in turquoise, and the closing section tag is at the very bottom. And then we have an H1 wrapped around chapter 1 and a P tag wrapped around "it was a dark and stormy night, ... And then there's a subsection which opens without the master section closing. So it's nested inside. That's what I mean by nested. It closes before the close section tag. There's an H2 with a subhead and another P tag. So you can see that in yellow, the P tag opens and then it closes, and then the very dark and stormy, very dark and very stormy. And the second very is enclosed in an M tag so that there's some tonal emphasis added to that word when it gets read. It's a top-level principle of HTML that the tags must be nested accurately or it won't render properly, and you will get a validation error, and more about that later. Some tags are self-closing and aren't meant to contain text, such as image tags and HR tags. So what I mean by self-closing is, I'll just go back up here, is this. See, this HR tag has a space and then a backslash. That means it's self-closing, just FYI. And then headers. So structure your content. Print-disabled users generally navigate through content by skipping from header to header. And when these headers are gathered in a thorough navigation and are marked up correctly, moving through an ebook to find the section one needs is a breeze. This presupposes using the right tag for the job. So this very top example, P class equals H1, is dreadful. Never do that. So what you're saying is that this is a paragraph when it's actually an H1, and you're giving it H1 characteristics using styles or CSS, and that's what the class is calling. But the second example here, H1 class equals CN, that's, oh, and it has a closing P tag. Goodness gracious, I always make typos. So that should be a closing H1 tag right there on the second line. H1 class equals CN, chapter 1, closing H1 tag. The above markup is machine readable and semantically meaningful. So it's a general best practice to have one top level header per chunk of HTML, but also be mindful to use headings in the correct order in the hierarchy. So for example, skipping from H1 to H3 without an H2 in the middle will cause errors, particularly in accessibility checkers like Ace by Daisy. It's worth noting that there are complex chapter openers that need to be well thought through. A title situation that is a chapter number plus a chapter title should still be in one header with a character level style shift. So that's what's happening on this third example here. H1 class equals CN, chapter 1, and then I'd like you to note that there's a word space there, and then a BR tag. That means that that's asking the system to give you a line break. And then the actual title of that chapter, Peter Breaks Through, is wrapped in a span tag that gives it some typographic distinction from chapter 1 in the rendering. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. But this is the best way to mark up complex chapter openers. You can also use P tags, like the subtitle in this final example is in a P tag, but it's all wrapped in a header tag so that the rendering engine that's reading this understands that all three of those lines are part of a header. Okay. All right, emphasis and bold, emphasis and strong. A key piece of the accessibility puzzle is to work out when you need emphasis versus when you need italics, and when you need a strong tag versus when you need to wrap something in a B tag or a bold tag. When I'm checking publisher EPUBs, this is generally a common mistake. It happens all the time, and I see these differences ill thought through all the time. It's important to get them straight because it impacts the assistive technology experience of your content. Use M and strong in situations where vocal emphasis is required. So these examples are from the Mozilla Network website. And these two sentences are distinctly different because of the uses of emphasis. I'm glad you weren't late. I'm glad you weren't late. The first sentence sounds genuinely relieved that the person wasn't late. In contrast, the second one, with both the words glad and late in italics or emphasis, sounds sarcastic or passive aggressive, expressing annoyance that the person arrived a bit late. In HTML, we use the M tag or emphasis tag element to mark up such instances. As well as making the document more interesting to read and listen to, these are recognized by screen readers and spoken out in a different tone of voice. Similarly, with strong, we use this markup where stress in the spoken language is required. So this liquid is highly toxic. I'm counting on you. Do not be late. So that's the strong around those little snippets mean that it's going to get read a little bit differently with vocal stress in the right spot. Marking them up semantically with a semantically correct tag will ensure that they are read correctly by assistive technologies. Both M and strong have clearly associated semantic meaning. Keeping accessibility top of mind, let's talk about where I and B are meant to be used, so italics and bold. In any given manuscript, in my experience, there are a solid number of instances of italics and emphasis, and it's the work of the managing editor to differentiate between those for the typesetter and the ebook developer. But that work is never, ever done in my experience. I have yet to receive a manuscript from editorial that has that marked out. So the task of teasing out those differences almost always falls to the ebook developer, which is problematic. So let's talk about where to use I and where to use M and where to use cite. Here's the rule of thumb. It is likely appropriate to use B or I to convey a meaning traditionally conveyed with bold or italics, provided there is no more suitable element. However, it always remains critical to keep an accessibility mindset. The concept of italics isn't very helpful to people using screen readers or to people using a writing system other than that of the Latin alphabet. So I is generally used to convey meaning traditionally conveyed by italics. So foreign words, taxonomic designation, technical terms, a thought. I read a book recently where a ghost was speaking, and every time the ghost spoke, it was in italics as a way of differentiating it from other characters speaking. B is used to convey a meaning traditionally conveyed by bold. So keywords, product names, a lead sentence. A lot of authoring systems InDesign default to only M or strong. Be mindful of this limitation and force change. In InDesign, for example, you can type in more semantic tags to map styles to. Okay, so language shifts. This is the next important piece of the accessibility puzzle. The base language of any EPUB must be declared in the OPF and in each individual HTML file. The language declaration goes on the root HTML element. It's important to note this as some authoring systems, again, InDesign, I'm always subtweeting InDesign in this workshop, they either leave out a language declaration or they put it on the wrong element. Declaring the language at the meta level and in the HTML means that assistive technology reads the text in the correct syntax and accent. So let me just switch really quickly to Oxygen. On the very top, on the third line of this document is the root HTML element, and then here is the language declaration. So that's declared right there. It's also declared in the OPF. So if I open this really quickly, you can see at the top in the metadata, it's declared right there that this is English. And then in this chapter, there is a little chunk of French, j'aime le chocolat, and it is marked as italics and with a language shift. So it's it's switching to French, and it's marked as that. So when this gets read, I'll demo this later, it gets read in the correct accent. It doesn't get read with an English accent. J'aime le chocolat, it's j'aime le chocolat, and assistive technology will understand that. So language shifts within content need to be declared so that the voiceover parses those phrases accurately. It's really something to hear text-to-speech reading English in its robot voice and then suddenly shifting into a French accent as it reads a properly marked up phrase. In an ideal world, editors and proofreaders are marking up italics and emphasis and language shifts in the manuscript and using styles and word processing software. I think awareness of this is changing and evolving, but we are a long way from that ideal world where typesetters and ebook developers aren't doing the heavy lifting in the back end. Okay, I think I'm a little bit over time, but we're going to go to a breakout room task now. So all the cool kids are using Semantic HTML, and Semantic HTML works better in all reading systems, including Kindle. Yes, really. So the breakout room task is to take the basic chunk of text and put it into validated HTML inside of Sigil. Your facilitators will help walk you through this process, but I've supplied a chapter 3 on the Google Drive, and I've given you a shell HTML file. So if I switch over to Sigil, I will show you that there is chapter 3 is here, and if you open it, there's no content inside of it. So I want you to put that content inside of there and put it in the correct P tags to mark up the header correctly, to mark any language shifts, any editorial breaks, etc. So give that a whirl, and I'll see you in 25 minutes or so. Okay, this module is going to be a little bit intense, so buckle up your seatbelts, everyone. So I'm going to talk about principles of EPUB accessibility. So there's sort of 10, what I call the big 10 of EPUB accessibility, but right off the start, I want to pause at the beginning to see and hear what the print disabled reading experience looks like. Live demos are always the best way to get a feel for how the coding decisions we make impact the reading experience. I have a very short video from one of the NELS testers. In case you haven't figured this out, NELS is the superheroes in this space. They do so much great work. This is an oldish video, but it's terrific.
Today,
here we go.
we're reading an accessible EPUB. We pull up the navigation pane, select a chapter, and press play.
Chapter 3. Before English. Our study of the history of the English language begins well before there is any English language to speak of.
To skip this section, we just press next.
Chapter 4. Introduction to Phonetics and the International Phonetic Alphabet.
The book is well laid out with excellent chapter navigation. Now let's try a book that's more challenging to read. The navigation pane is empty. Play reads one word at a time.
Introduction. Capital T. He. Cattle. Industry. In.
And next only skips by 15 seconds.
Ranch. Hands.
This book has been produced in fixed layout and has no chapter navigation. Accessible publishing only requires small changes, but it makes a big difference.
So if
Today,
you took the time to watch the video that we suggested you watch, the demo from Kai Lee from NELS, that will repeat a little bit of what he said, although his video is much longer and much more in depth. I hope you had a chance to watch it because learning from the lived experience of people with print disabilities is extraordinarily important in this space. Okay, a great deal of EPUB 3 content is generated by Adobe's InDesign. Most publishers use software like InDesign to lay out their print books, which is still the dominant market format. In a way, InDesign is a relatively democratic tool with which to make ebooks, not because it's cheap, but because many publishers already have it and use it well for print. I have worked closely with Adobe's engineers since about 2010 to try to make their EPUB outfit as fit as possible. The good news is that sometimes they listen. The bad news is that they see Epub as a teeny tiny sliver of what InDesign can do, and their focus is almost certainly elsewhere. As a consequence, I have spent a lot of my time and energy and resources figuring out how to bend to InDesign to my will. But the technical debt created by our obsequious use of InDesign is real. So the slide on the screen shows 3 cavemen. 2 are pushing and pulling a cart filled with rocks, and the cart has square wheels. And there's a 3rd caveman behind them holding up round wheels and with a slightly shocked look on his face. And the 2 cavemen pulling and pushing the cart are saying, "No thanks, we're too busy." And that's the technical debt of InDesign. They are too busy to fix the Epub export. A sidebar, I'm actually working with Richard Orme from the DAISY Consortium and a couple other people from the Accessible Books Consortium to pressure the engineers into doing a better job. And it's going. I wouldn't say it's going well, but I'm hopeful. I'm skeptical, but hopeful. Okay, so the technical debt created by our obsequious use of InDesign is real. Pausing and using InDesign more thoughtfully doesn't necessarily take more time, particularly when you consider the long shelf life of digital books. And honestly, folding accessibility considerations into a workflow at every step of the publishing process just makes good sense. If creators are thinking about image descriptions as they draw the pictures for a children's book, for example, then we're ahead of the game. A nonfiction author can write an image description at the same time that they're writing the caption. The typesetter can build master pages in InDesign that are considering the needs of the ebook from before the book is even laid out. And all of these basic steps aren't more work if they're part of the process from acquisition through editing to finished books. Remediating an ebook long after production will be time-consuming and expensive, I promise. I also want to pause here and point you to the DAISY knowledge base glossary. I worry a lot about using language you aren't used to, and if you're anything like me, you will just nod your head and pretend you know what I'm talking about and try to look it up later. Please don't be shy about pausing me and forcing me to explain myself or using the chat to ask for clarification. Okie dokie, let's move forward. The principles of ebook accessibility are as follows. Separate style and content, be mindful of navigation and structure, use semantics. Images should be pictures, not tables or text. Oh my goodness. Always use image descriptions. Create a page list for your content, define the languages as we talked about in the first module. Treat math and interactive content accessibly, and use accessibility metadata. Okay, I'm going to go, that's not all you're going to learn about those today. I'm going to go through some of those really in depth, and some I'm going to point you in the right direction if you want more information. Separating style and content is a foundational category to ebook accessibility and often one of the hardest to understand and move past, partly because of a long tradition of thinking exclusively about how things look on the page, and partly because of a lack of information. So the slide on the screen reads, style is just a layer between your markup and the device that renders it, not an intrinsic quality you can rely on to say anything about your content. And that's again from Matt Garish and Accessible Epub 3. Typographic conventions had to convey meaning in print because that was all that was available. They're still useful for sighted readers, but they're the wrong place to be carrying meaning in digital content. And that's adapted from a Matt Garish quote as well. So this is where your potential print hangover is the heaviest. If your content isn't machine readable, then it's not perceivable by all of your readers. Presume that your HTML gets separated from your carefully constructed CSS in every book. It must be machine readable. So that's why some HTML like P class equals H1, for example, means nothing to reading systems because it should be an H1 tag. Meaning should only come from markup. Style is just a layer between your markup and the device that renders it, not an intrinsic quality you can rely on to say anything about your content. The meaning of the content should be the same both with and without any styles or formatting applied. Separating styles from markup is consequently not just about keeping the CSS in a separate file from your markup, but also recognizing that the markup must convey meaning to be useful to all users, and that visual rendering is only one possible use case. So I'm going to quickly create a Word file and show you exactly what I mean. I hope you can see that Word file. I'm going to create Okay, so this header, I could make this bold and make it big, and it looks like a header now, but it's not tagged as a header. So underneath the hood, it's just bold and big text. It's not a header. If I use the styles pane, which I'll open up here, and made that header, I'm going to clear that formatting and then click on heading 1, then that's what I mean by separating style from content. This isn't local overrides making that header look like a header. It's an actual style that's making it look like a header. So this file, when it gets read into InDesign and then exported to ebook or whatever authoring or workflow that you use, that header is going to retain its headeriness. It's going to be what it's supposed to be. So if it's formatted correctly, then it will come through at the other end correctly. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Some people have a hard time understanding that, but I hope that that makes good sense to you now. Use HTML5 tags. The integrity of your content depends entirely on using the right element for the job. I think I've said this already once today, and you'll probably hear me say it again. Every HTML tag carries native semantics. All HTML is mapped to APIs that communicate with assistive technologies. And HTML is a language of semantics, not a language of containers. So we talked a lot about this in the first module. The big four that I see developers consistently missing in the wild are section, figure, fig caption, and side. Use them meaningfully and with intent. Print to digital exports are notorious for taking the path of least complexity, resulting in div span soup. Banish divs from your personal knowledge base and using the correct tags means that your content is machine readable, skippable, and legible. Publications typically have a primary narrative that users are expected to follow from beginning to end, and being able to navigate this dialogue uninterrupted is a key factor in making publications accessible. Rich markup allows secondary materials to be automatically excluded from text-to-speech playback or refreshable Braille rendering if the user doesn't want their reading experience interrupted, and it gives users choice, which is an incredibly important point to make. So for example, any HTML chunk should be in a section tag. Subheaders and subsequent content should have a nested section tag around it. Marginalia, notes, sidebars, etc. should be marked up as an aside. All ancillary content belongs inside this tag. Where section is body content, figure is secondary content that is also part of the main flow of the document. So this refers mainly to inline images, figures, maps, or tables when they are content specific and not part of an aside. Sometimes they're not content specific and they should be wrapped in aside. And then the semantic markup of editorial breaks or context breaks is with an HR tag. I think that there was an editorial break in the chapter 3 content you were working in the breakout room for module 1, and I wasn't as explicit about HR tags as I should have been, but that's how you mark an editorial or thematic break. You can build CSS definitions around the HR tag. You could give it a class so that it includes an image or asterisk or a doodad or whatever suits the design. Okay. Navigation. No reader ever complained that there were too many ways to get inside the content. There is no such thing as too much navigation. So build a thorough table of contents with as many levels as there are headers, being aware that some reading systems will choke on anything deeper than 2 levels and it just won't show it, but it's still there under the hood for readers who are using assistive technologies. So some of those levels might be hidden, just be aware of that. And it's totally okay to use both an inline table of contents, sort of where, after the copyright page, where a traditional contents page would be in a print product, and also a navigation document. They don't cancel each other out. It's okay to have both. Build supplemental lists, like lists of illustrations, lists of tables, lists of maps and figures, because, well, why not? Build a full set of landmarks. Landmarks, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on this, but I can point you to some resources about it if you like. But landmarks are a breakout section in the Epub 3 navigation document, which lists the bones of an ebook. It replaces the guide in Epub 2. So use landmarks to point to the start of front matter, title page, copyright page, back matter, table of contents, bibliography, index, glossary, etc. So the bones of a book, those sort of common elements that are in a lot of different kinds of content. Remember that, again, there's no such thing as too much navigation. Page lists. So mark print equivalent page breaks in the digital version of the content. This means that a variety of readers of the content can literally always be on the same page. It is also one more way to navigate into the content. And then when you build a page list, be cautious to declare the source ISBN in the OPF metadata. Without this key piece of information, your carefully structured print page breaks are a waste of time. So declaring that in the source ISBN in the OPF metadata, it means that you're using a DC source tag around it. And then if you're creating page lists and you want to do it from InDesign, hit me up. Figure out a way to contact me. My email address is on some of the slides, as is my website, which has a contact page. I have a script that works in InDesign that I'm more than happy to share with you. Structure. Make sure that your EPUB has a clear structure with headers and subheaders and that they cascade accurately using the right element for the job. One of the focuses of the ACE accessibility checker, which we're going to learn more about in a minute, and a frequently misunderstood part of ebook dev work is the header cascade. The top level header in any HTML file should be an H1 generally, and there shouldn't be an H5, for example, without an H1, an H2, an H3, and an H4 above it. For the purposes of trade publishing, the chapter number and chapter title should be in an H1 tag, just like I showed you in the first module. And then again, if you have a lot of bits and bobs in your header, wrap it in a header tag, just like I showed you in module 1. Semantics, which is also known as ARIA roles. So let's percolate on semantics for a little minute. What do I mean by semantics? Here's another Matt Garish quote. As you may have figured out, he's a kind of an important person in this work and has a lot of quotable sound bites. Structure is the elements you use to craft your EPUB content, and semantics is the additional meaning you can layer on top of those structures to better indicate what they represent. So semantics are like the blue, green, or yellow sticky notes that you use on the side of a manuscript to give a flag extra meaning. Blue comes from proofreading, green comes from editorial, yellow comes from copy editing, something like that. For users of assistive technologies, which rely on an understanding of the underlying markup in order to facilitate navigation, the ARIA role attribute allows more precise meanings to be applied to generic tags. Sometimes the reading system will use that semantic inflection to prescribe a specific behavior, like pop-up footnotes. And there's two kinds of semantics. One is EPUB type, and one are ARIA roles, or what's known as role equals sort of doc chapter. That's what the ARIA role looks like. The EPUB, but be aware that the EPUB type semantics did not live up to what was planned for it. The EPUB type attribute was intended to serve a similar function to the ARIA role attribute in EPUB 3, but accessibility support never materialized. So the spec writers have migrated entirely to ARIA roles. And then there's a full set of ARIA roles at this website, and I'm just going to show it to you here. This is the DAISY knowledge base. So it's kb.daisy.org. And this is a page about ARIA roles, and it has a sort of a full set of them somewhere. Where are they? Why am I not finding them? Well, they're here somewhere, and if you dig around, you'll find them. And this is what the ARIA role looks like. Role equals doc chapter in that sample. This is an exceptional page that if you're going to use semantics in your content, you would do well to bookmark. Okay, images equals pictures, not tables or text. So don't use an image where text will do. So settings, for example, a table as an image addresses a situational disability, i.e. the inability to view an entire table at once, by creating another disability, which is limited visual access to the content. Give your readers the credit to understand the limitation their devices impose and the flexibility to find other ways to read. With all your weight and might, avoid setting text as image. Some ideas: turn tables into lists with the header columns repeated along the left side, flip tables on their sides and rethink them. It's worth simmering here for a second. Keep the data live, but consider presenting it differently. Tables wider than 4 columns just don't work that well in ebooks. And be wary of Indesign's table export. As with many Epub and Indesign things, the markup that it produces is overwrought, even on tables that are cleanly styled with cell and table styles. So let's talk about how to accessibly treat tables for a minute. Tables should always have a header row. Assistive technology will read the header with the table cell so that it's not just a meaningless jumble of data and figures. Imagine table rows being a tonally read aloud. They'll be disastrous. Mark headers with a T head or TH elements. Include a caption and/or a summary of the table. Don't rely on the text surrounding the table to put it into context. I see the comment in the chat about not being able to take in everything I'm saying, that I'm talking too fast. And I will just pause here and tell you that the scripts that I'm for these lectures are in the Google Drive, and you can sit with them and read them and learn more. I understand that this is a lot of content and it's a lot of to take in, but I have provided these scripts in addition to a lot of links to learn more. So ask questions in your breakout rooms. I'm sorry, I know this is a lot of content, but there's a lot to fit in. Okay, so include a caption and/or summary of the table. Don't rely on the text surrounding the table to put it into context. Mark up a table as a figure if it's secondary content, that is, if it doesn't need to be read at the point of insertion, if it's not part of the primary narrative of the content. Avoid using table markup to control presentation. Tables are for data, not to control how things render. If you absolutely, positively, no way around it, have to use a table, then omit any markup that points to data containing table, like headers, captions, summary, etc. And if you're going to place an image instead of a table, then hyperlink a footnote out to plain text table in a non-linear HTML file that reflects accessibility best practices for tables. Print-disabled readers don't care what the data looks like as long as they can consume it. And then image descriptions. It's the next chunk of the accessibility puzzle. Describe your images. It's important. Readers consume content in a variety of ways. For example, I watch TV with the captions on because I have some hearing loss. And it annoys the piss out of me when the captions are sloppy, but I'm merely annoyed, not fully prevented from understanding the content. By not describing your images, you're leaving out an important chunk of your readership. I'm going to switch here to Thorium and give you a little sample of what that sounds like. And of course, it shows up on the other screen. Okay, so here is this Peter Pan book. I'm going to open it and I'm going to go to the wrong one, to the title page. In this book, I've set the title page. Go. It's lagging. Apologies. Here we go. I think I have too many things open. Everything's having a heart attack. Okay, so in this case, I set the page as an image to demo what an image description functions like. So I'm going to turn on the read aloud function, the text to speech, and you'll hear the image description that's built underneath of this.
Title page, Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Published by Pretend Books.
So I hope you could hear that. I'm always nervous about sound with Zoom shares, but hopefully that was clear enough to you. So who writes the alt text? We've gone over this a little bit. Editors, copy editors, production managers, or outsource it. It should be someone with an editorial investment in the content. Instructions to illustrators make good alt text, and there are also very good online training tools that help train authors. Okay, and a factoring. Where an image is not put into context by the surrounding text, describe it. And there are many ways to do this. The simplest is alt text. Let's go in and look at that title page and look at how it's described. So here's the figure tag. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And then the image tag, class equals title page because it's got some vertical height on it. It's calling the image to.jpg. And then here's the alt text that you just heard. Title page, colon, Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. It doesn't need more of a description than that. That works perfectly. So that's the simplest way to do it, is to just include some alt text on all of your image tags. And while there's no technical limitation on how much text can be included in the alt tag, common practice is to limit it to a brief sentence or two. Lengthy alt text can be burdensome for the end user and difficult to navigate. This method is good when no markup at all is required of the description text. And then when you need a longer description, so let's go back to this book and look at this. I'm going to go ahead to chapter 1 where there is this table. So this is an image with an extended description. You saw this a little bit in the YouTube video that Kai narrated. This image has a very brief bit of alt text, and then it has a link out to a plain text explanation of the graph. That should read plain. I'm so good at typos, you wouldn't believe it. They're in everything I touch. And then when I click this link, it takes me out to, let me switch back to Oxygen for a second. It takes me out to this file. It's the long description.xhtml. This is a piece of HTML that I will show you in the content.opf. So it's a piece of HTML. It's right here. See, item ID equals long description. And if we go down to the spine, it's here and it's at the end and it says linear equals no. So as someone is paging through this book, in most reading systems, that long description isn't going to show up. It will only be there for users who click the link. So when I click this link, it takes me to the image and then the description with some markup. So this is marked up as a list. And if I had this read, it would read all of that to me. If I had low vision and wanted to make that bigger, I could. And then at the bottom, there's a link back to the chapter. So very easy to use. And that's the best way to do a long description, a non-linear HTML file that you link out to and link back. It's very elegant, very simple to use. There are other ways to do long descriptions. For example, using details or using a fig caption that's hidden. But I would caution you against those because they're not well supported across the device and rendering engine spectrum. The idea with this last method is that it's easy for assistive technologies to use. So this is the best way to do it. The DAISY knowledge base has several techniques spelled out very clearly. But be cautious that a long description, as I've just shown you, and what is in the EPUB that was supplied to you in the Google Drive is the best way to do it. And then again, where an image is purely decorative, leave the alt text empty and add a role equals presentation. So I'm going to switch back to Oxygen and then go to, I think it was in the dedication. Nope, in the epigraph. Nope, it was in a different version of the ebook. But if you're using, if you have an ebook that has just like a little swirl or something at the bottom of the page to mark the end of that page, that's just decoration and it doesn't need an image description. So in that case, you leave the alt text empty and you add role equals presentation. This will tell assistive technology that there's nothing to see here, there's nothing of note, and to skip ahead. And then don't skip logos. They should be described as well. Okay, define languages. I've gone over that in detail. Oh, although I do want to go back and demo this for you. So let me go back a little bit. Oh gosh. Technology is only your friend when it works well. Okay, I'm going to have the text to speech read this paragraph. And what I want you to pay attention to is when it hits j'aime le chocolat. Okay. So,
Of course they lived at 14, their house number on their street, and until Wendy came her mother was the chief one.
J'aime le chocolat.
She was a lovely lady, with a...
it just makes me so happy every time I hear that language shift. It's wonderful. That's marked up properly. You've seen that in the HTML. I can go back and show you if you like. It's right here. So this is how that's marked up. It's right here. I've marked that there's a French language shift and it reads correctly in a text-to-speech environment. So the primary language of any given HTML file should be declared at the root level. We talked about that earlier, so that it gets read in the correct language. And then mark language shifts. And you can build this into your InDesign file via character style sheets. And you can also build it into a Word file via character style sheets. So everybody in the publishing workflow can be a part of this work. So the next thing is accessible treatment of math and interactive content. Math is tricky and is a little out of scope for this workshop. MathML has been under development forever, but it's still not super duper well supported. And writing MathML is incredibly complex. And in addition to the fact that support from assistive tech is not always there. Text-to-speech is just not capable of reading it reliably, for example. The DAISY knowledge base, and it has an excellent link, which I'll show you. One quick second. They have a MathML page, and it says, it cautions that MathML does not work in all user agents correctly currently, but it has a full explanation. It's just a little out of scope for this workshop, which is meant to be beginner, and I don't consider MathML to be beginner, but there's information there if you want to learn more about it. Accessibility metadata is another important piece of the kind of big 10 of ebook accessibility, but hang around for the third part of this workshop for a full explanation of this thorny and complex topic. Tools and troubleshooting. So in the early days of making ebooks, when there wasn't a lot of reference materials or resources around, a lot of ebook developers used the eProduction hashtag on Twitter to rant and rave and to seek advice. That method still works to some extent, but the plethora of tools and resources is dramatically different from a decade ago. The most important tools now are the DAISY knowledge base, in addition to Epubcheck and Ace by DAISY. I hope you were all able to download those two things. They're critical tools in making ebooks and checking its accessibility. Epubcheck is maintained by DAISY in the W3C and is a validator that works against the latest specification. So it's maintained all the time and is always under development. It's available in a variety of ways, both as a command tool, as an online tool, or as a drag and drop local tool. The drag and drop local tool is the easiest to use. I have it here and I'm just going to open it on my screen so you can see it. And so of course it went to the other screen. So this is what it looks like. And you literally just drag and drop a PDF on top of it, and it will run through that PDF and tell you if there are any validation errors in there. So this is the PDF from module 1, and it doesn't have any validation errors. When you go to your breakout rooms after this lecture section, you will be checking an EPUB that's been sort of booby-trapped with some errors, and you'll try to work through them. The devs at DAISY are involved in the conversations around the spec and the standards, and they're constantly maintaining both Ace by DAISY and Epubcheck. So they're both vibrant, constantly updated tools. Epubcheck is a free download available from the Pagina GmbH site. It automatically checks EPUBs for conformance to the standard, and it reports issues that are in violation of the requirements of the standard and/or that could cause a publication not to open or to render in reading systems. Epubcheck gives a variety of nearly impenetrable error messages. I'm so sorry about this, but they're complex and they're hard to work through. But there's cookie crumbs in all of the error messages that help you figure out how to fix them. So fatal errors are red, and they are as they sound. They mean that your EPUB won't open and won't function at all. They're often HTML issues, like forgetting a closing tag. Mess up something in the OPF and you'll often get a fatal error, and these are errors that must be corrected. The next level is what's called an error severity message. They're not quite as substantial, but still not good, and I highly recommend that you take the time to fix them. They typically will not prevent an EPUB publication from being opened, but they often lead to unintended consequences, like content not rendering as expected. Errors typically need to be corrected to ensure the usability of the publication, but some format-specific errors do not affect the accessibility of the ebook. And then yellow warning errors are a level below what's called error. They identify deviations from recommended practice in the EPUB standard, and a publication with warnings is not invalid and may have no unintended rendering issues, but not following recommended practices can lead to interoperability issues. So what that means is it may look okay on iBooks, but it won't look okay on Kobo. That's what I mean by interoperability issues. Warnings do not have to be corrected, but is generally advised to follow recommended practices. Many vendors will not accept publications with yellow warnings. And then information errors are blue, and they're the lowest level message output by default by Epubcheck. These messages usually provide alert about issues with Epubcheck itself. For example, that it might not be able to decrypt a file to check it, or that a potential issue is under discussion. They're not common. Info messages do not necessarily require any action, but are important to review to discover what Epubcheck has a problem with. In my experience, these are often about fonts. Epubcheck doesn't like TTF or TTC fonts, for example, and they can be ignored. Epubcheck uses cookie crumbs to gives the user cookie crumbs to try to figure out the error. It's taken many years and a lot of experience for me to get used to what is critical and what can be ignored, and that just comes with experience and time. In the breakout rooms, you'll experiment with an Epub, which I've planted with some landmines, and you'll try to figure out what to fix, how to fix it, and what you might be able to look away from. And then Ace by Daisy is another indispensable tool. When I'm working on an Epub, I validate constantly using Epubchecker. It's a good idea, especially early in your work with Epubs, to validate constantly so that you can see where you've introduced an error as you're editing HTML and CSS. And then when I feel like I'm almost done, I run an Epub through Ace. And while there is a command line tool, there's also a GUI version, a graphic user interface version of Ace. It's right here. This is what it looks like. And this, again, this is just a drag and drop. And then it takes a second and it runs, and it will give you so there's one serious error here, 3 moderate errors, and 2 minor errors for a total of 6 errors. What I find is that Ace is, so let me just explain a little bit more about Ace. Ace is built on web accessibility checkers called Axe, but is tailored for the Epub format. It's a drag and drop tool that's easy to run, but less easy to wade through the results. Everything it squawks about is salient to the accessibility of your work. Epubchecker is just about the validation of your Epub. Ace goes different on specific accessibility metrics. And a note about Ace Epubchecker. No, sorry, a note about Ace. My script is wrong there. It still requires a knowledgeable human to parse the results. Roman Daltour, one of the primary developers, says that it goes about 30% of the way to checking the accessibility of an Epub. So for example, if your images are missing alt text, it's not going to flag that as an error. It could be that it's missing alt text because it's put into context in the Epub, and so the missing alt text makes sense. And so using Epubchecker requires some sort of human knowledge of the accessibility journey and what's okay and what's not. Okay, this was a long one, and it was just packed with stuff. I understand that some of you may have gotten lost. I'm fingers crossed that I didn't lose all of you. We're ready now for the breakout rooms. Please go to your breakout rooms and use Epubchecker and Ace by Daisy to go through your own errors. Like if you've brought errors to this workshop, then you can use them to go through your own errors with the facilitator, or test the module tool provided Epub, which has been booby-trapped with errors. So off you go, and good luck. Yeah, hopefully you aren't all lost. I hope that the breakout rooms are helping. I know that the last module was quite a lot. Do use the script to go over it, and I hope we haven't lost too many people. Okay, so this module is about accessibility metadata. And this module has a handout, a chart of possible schema.org descriptors. So you may want to have it opened on your screen or on a side screen during the session. Also, an important note, the text of this module owes everything to Leah Brochu from NELS. She actually wrote this up for the APLN website, which is a knowledge-based website that we're launching sometime in the summer. It's going to come from eBook Canada, and just watch for that. But Leah did most of the heavy lifting around this module, and I want to acknowledge how great she is.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay. Accessibility metadata is metadata that shares the accessibility features in a book. When it is included in an ebook, it enables potential readers to know if your book meets their needs and tells them about all the amazing accessibility features you have been working so hard to include. Accessibility metadata should always be included in an ebook's OPF file, and creating and including Onyx records with accessibility metadata is also highly recommended. Accessibility metadata allows you to share all kinds of details about the book, like if you've included accessibility features such as page navigation or image description, if the display is customizable, if there are any hazards like sound or flashing, which could cause a physical reaction, and much more. Including as much accessibility metadata as possible will ensure that readers can be confident that they're picking a book that meets their needs. There are 3 types of accessibility metadata which should be included with an EPUB. The first one, which we're going to talk about first, is the schema.org accessibility metadata, and that's included in the EPUB in the OPF file. Onyx accessibility metadata travels in an XML file that goes along into the supply chain with your ebook. It's a separate file, the Onyx record. And then conformance or evaluation metadata, which is also included in the OPF file, and can also be included in the Onyx file. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if you're going to do the work to make your ebooks as accessible as possible under the circumstances, then also do the work to describe it so that those ebooks are discoverable by people who need the data. The good news is that there are 2 profound ways to describe your content in your metadata, but the bad news is that including it is a somewhat hopeful gesture at this moment in time, as most vendors don't expose that data. A lot of accessibility metadata is aspirational right now, but change is coming. So I strongly recommend that you get in the habit of using accessibility metadata with the understanding that the big retail vendors are working on it and will be exposing it soon. At present, Vital Source and Red Shelf, which are both higher ed ebook stores, are showing EPUB accessibility metadata descriptors. So this is the metadata from this screenshot on your screen is the metadata from a book called Seven Fallen Feathers. And it's from Vital Source. So this shows the accessibility summary, which is just a plain text summary. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And then the various bits and pieces of the schema.org metadata, including the conformance and certification details down at the bottom. So Seven Fallen Feathers is published by House of Anansi Press and House of Anansi Press, where Nicole Lamb works, one of your facilitators, is certified by Benetech and is certified as Global Certified Accessible Content. Their workflow is certified, so everything they produce that's reflowable meets or exceeds accessibility standards, and they detail that in their metadata, as you can see on the screen. Excuse me. Schema.org metadata has 4 different possible descriptors. Accessibility summary, which is a human readable overview of the accessibility of the text. Accessibility feature, which shares the accessibility features that have been included. Accessibility hazards, which provides a warning for features which could be an issue for some readers. Access mode, which describes the contents of the book. And access mode sufficient, which identifies the different combination of senses that can be used to consume the content. This last one, access mode sufficient, is only recommended and not required to meet the EPUB accessibility specification, but it can still be really helpful to a reader. Okay, so let's talk about accessibility summary. The accessibility summary is a human readable overview of accessibility features. There can only be one accessibility summary in an ebook, and that same one can be copied into the Onyx metadata. The accessibility summary author and guidelines explain it quite well. This piece of metadata is extraordinarily unique and important in that it provides a human readable description of the accessibility of a publication. It is expected that people who do not have formal training in HTML, Epub, or who are not experts in accessibility will be reading the accessibility summary. So this means that it's quite important that you do a couple things. You use plain language and avoid jargon. That's a really important piece. Write out acronyms before using the abbreviation. So like Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG in accessibility circles. That's how we all pronounce it. Don't assume that consumers are going to know what that means. And then include all accessibility features. Accessibility summary may be the only piece of metadata that some users read. And then if you decide to use a template, make sure that the accessibility summary is customized in some way for every book. So a sample summary could be something like this. This publication is screen reader friendly and is accessible to users of assistive technology. It was created with accessibility in mind. There are image descriptions, a page list, and detailed navigation and structure. There are no accessibility hazards like sound and video, and it meets the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines level AA. I started working with a publisher who includes details about the pagination in their book. So their accessibility summary is this. This title has been graded against WCAG 2.0 and meets AA requirements. This book contains print page numbers, reading order, structural navigation, table of contents, index, page list, landmarks, and alt text for all images. The copyright page has been moved to the end in the ebook edition, and this causes its page numbers to appear out of order. Additionally, blank pages have been removed from the ebook while their page breaks have been left in for reasons of structural flow. So they've done a few things to the ebook, and they explain that in the accessibility summary. You can also use the accessibility summary to say, you know what, this is a fixed layout ebook. It's not all that accessible. Fair warning. Use more professional language than that, but you can use the accessibility summary to communicate things about your ebook that you feel like consumers will want to know. Okay, oops. Accessibility feature is as it's described. The accessibility feature property shares the features that you have worked to include in the ebook. You can include as many properties as you need, and there are lists available on the DAISY Knowledge Base and the W3C schema.org accessibility properties for discoverability vocabulary. There's various places to get it. What I'm going to suggest to a lot of you, especially the newcomers in the group, is that, so on the screen now is my browser, and it's showing the DAISY Knowledge Base. If you scroll down a little bit on this knowledge base, you get to the metadata section. And under schema.org, there's a very good description of what's going on here. And you can, so accessibility feature, you can click that and get some values that you might want to use in your book. And then down at the bottom of this page, there are links out to, if we ever get to the bottom, holy smokes, this is a long page. Links out to other places that describe what's going on here. So there's lots of different values that you might use in accessibility feature. One of the things I do is to, when I'm making an ebook, I copy this. I copy this straight out of the DAISY Knowledge Base and then adapt it for my ebooks. So I don't work with a lot of books that have math in it, so I take that out. I don't work with any books that have flashing hazards or sound hazards, so I leave that in. It's okay to crib code from other places, particularly places with it, like DAISY Knowledge Base, where it's designed for you to crib their code. Okay, so the accessibility feature can be lots of things. These are the possible values: alternative text, display transformability. So what that means is that you don't have hard pixel dimensions on your fonts, and it can be upsized or downsized. So the display is transformable because of the way you've coded. coded it. It can also have an index, a long description. It could have no accessibility features. That's totally an option. Print page numbers, reading order, structural navigation, synchronized audio, and table of contents. And then again, I would refer you back to both the PDFs that I've supplied on the Google Drive, which have a lot of these lists in it, and also to the Daisy knowledge base for the exact way that this is supposed to be done. So you can see a lot of these use camel case, and you need to, you need to maintain that and conform to it. The value alternative text means that all the important images have a text description. Display transformability means that users can modify how the page looks. Index means that there's an index in it. Long descriptions means that there's a couple of complex images that have extended descriptions. None means that this publication does not include any accessibility features. Totally a possibility. And if this is true, mentioning it in your metadata is a great thing to do. Print page numbers mean that static print page breaks have been marked in the text. And reading order means that there's a logical reading order to the text, etc. Okay, the next category is accessibility hazard. And this discloses any features that may have unwanted physiological impact on some readers. This could include things like flashing, which could cause seizures, motion simulation, which can cause motion sickness, or sound, which certain sounds can also cause seizures. So these are the possible values for accessibility hazard. I think this is not exhaustive, that there are more, but this is the basic set. I'm pretty sure Charles will weigh in the chat if this is exhaustive. He knows more about accessibility metadata than I do, that's for darn sure. So if there's no sound hazards, if there's no sound or auditory hazards in your ebook, then say that there's no sound hazards. If there is sound in your book, then say so that a user can go into your ebook understanding which kind of experience they're going to have. Oh, Charles has stepped out. We'll hassle him when he gets back. Access mode. This is a really basic one. And this is the access mode property is used to describe how people can perceive the information or content of a book. So one of the things that I have not gone into today is POUR principles. POUR is essential to accessibility, and POUR is an acronym that stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So accessible content sort of hits some of every one of those things. And access mode describes how people can perceive the content of your book. More than one type of content can be included with each mode on a different line. The following list, this list on your screen, textual, visual, auditory, and tactile, are the most common values you might include in an accessible ebook. It's not exhaustive, and so you should go to, I'm going to post this link in the chat just so that you have it. This is the link in my browser, but I'll also put this in the chat so that you have it and you can bookmark it for later use if you want to. So access mode textual means will be included for basically every ebook ever. It means that the book has information that can be accessed textually, i.e. that there's text in it that a person or a screen reader can access. Access mode visual means that the book contains images, graphics, or video. Almost every book has at least one image in it, so even if it's just the cover, so this will also be included in most books. Access mode auditory means that the book contains audio. So whether it's narration embedded in the text, songs that you can play, or any other bit of audio, big or small. And access mode tactile means that the book contains tactile content like tactile graphics or diagrams or electronic braille. Access mode sufficient refers to the way that someone can access all of the content or information in an ebook. If the book has text and images, then we say textual, visual, i.e. someone can read the text and look at the images. If the book has included image descriptions, then we can also say textual, since everything in the book can be accessed through the text, i.e. the image descriptions can be read. If the book has embedded audio that describes all the images and narrates all the text, including front and back matter, then we can say auditory. So the following list covers all the current sufficient access modes that you need to note in an accessible ebook. But this is often it's under renovation, so new access mode sufficient values may appear in future. So watch the DAISY knowledge base. Access mode sufficient textual can be included when all of the book's content can be accessed textually. And usually that means that all the images are described. The value visual can be used when all of the book's content can be accessed visually, and this will apply to really almost every book. Access mode sufficient auditory can be included when all of the book's content can be accessed via audio. So all of the text and images are included in a recording. Tactile can be included when all of the book's content can be accessed via touch, and usually this means that the image is described. And then combinations is a funny value. But if the book has text and images, then we say textual, comma, visual, i.e. someone can read the text and look at the images. If the book has included image descriptions, then we can also say textual, since everything in the book can be accessed through the text, i.e. the image descriptions can be read. And then so combinations are what I mean by that. That's not really the value. The value is textual, comma, visual. So some combination of them. And then the next thing to look at is an example. So this is cribbed almost directly from the DAISY knowledge base. And this is what your schema.org accessibility metadata, i.e. the metadata that's embedded in the OPF of a book, what it would look like. So this is a relatively simple book with image descriptions, long descriptions, a complete navigation file and heading structure, a table of contents, and some audio clips. And this is what the metadata would look like. So it has access mode textual, access mode visual, access mode sufficient, textual, comma, visual, and also just textual. Accessibility features include alternative text, long description, structural navigation, table of contents, alternative text. And then the accessibility hazard feature, those values are no flashing hazard, no motion simulation hazard, and sound, because it includes some sound. So crib from the DAISY knowledge base and then adapt it to each ebook, being cautious to adapt your accessibility summary to the unique content in every book that you use. Okay, Onyx. Onyx is the metadata that we all know if we've worked in publishing for any amount of time, or even if you're just a book consumer, the data that gets displayed on Amazon or Indigo or any place that you buy books comes from the Onyx file. Onyx is an XML-based standard for rich book metadata, providing a consistent way for publishers, retailers, and their supply chain partners to communicate a wide range of information about their products. It is a commercial data format designed to be used globally and not limited to any one language or the characteristics of a specific national book trade. It's widely used throughout the book and ebook supply chain in North America, Europe, and Australasia, and is increasingly being adopted in the Asia Pacific region and South America too. An Onyx record is a separate XML file that is sometimes packaged together with an ebook and sometimes left separate, but either way, it is distributed alongside an ebook. It contains all kinds of metadata about a book, like title, author, edition, page count, etc. And it also has a set of accessibility metadata. Onyx records can be used to describe product features for the book supply chain and can be sent from the publisher or creator of the Epub file digital book or digital book to those who make the products available for sale, for loan, or for subscription. It's estimated that making your digital content more accessible might increase the number of potential readers by 10 or 15%. So if you've gone to all the trouble of improving the accessibility of your titles, then you should use your metadata to highlight this. So let's switch over again to Chrome, and I'm going to take you. So this is maybe I will put this link in the chat so you have access to it. This is a full list of the Onyx list, code list 196 values. So there are a number here. They have notes that explain what they mean, and the values are here in the very first column. This link that I put in the chat, it's extensive. It goes on for miles. It has a long list of values which you can use to describe the accessibility of your ebook. It's long and fairly self-explanatory, to be honest, so I won't go through all of them. The primary issue at this point in time is that metadata aggregators don't include all the values in this list. So this is your chance to put your advocacy hat on and try to get the database providers that you work with to update what they allow. So for example, at House of Anansi Press, they use something called Onyx, and it only allows 2 or 3 of the values from this potential list. And when I worked at Anansi, we were harassing them to include more, but it was very low on their priority list. So for the purposes of this workshop, this is purely informational. We're not going to edit the Onyx files in the breakout rooms, for example. I just want you to know that this exists and that you can use this. You can harass the metadata people in-house at the publisher that you work at to use the code list 196 to describe your content a little better. Okay, and then conformance metadata is also known as evaluation metadata. This is the last, but definitely not the least, of the accessibility metadata available to you. This set of metadata should be included once a publisher or a book has been certified. When it is applicable, this metadata is included in the ebook's OPF file. And here's a very brief example from a Benetech GCA certified publisher. So on the screen, there's a chunk of metadata. The metadata is in the Courier font, and then the plain text is in the sans serif font. So this is a link out to the accessibility, the conformance that it's conforming to. So the IDPF website with the WCAG AA standard. It says meta property equals accessibility certified by, and it's Benetech via eBound Canada. eBound is at present running a certification pilot. Some of your facilitators are certifiers from that pilot. And the meta property equals accessibility : certifier credential. And then it's a link to the URL that Benetech uses, the bornaccessible.org/certification/GCA credential. This explains to users where the conformance comes from. Passing ACE by DAISY is not conformance. Certification is next level. I see your question, Stephanie, in the chat. It's possible to self-certify, but I strongly recommend against that because the certification that you would go through with something like Benetech, or there's an organization in Italy called LIA who also offers a certification. It's a very rigorous. It includes extensive accessibility metrics. And it is quite different than what ACE by DAISY does. So if you're interested in certification, then check out what Benetech does and check out what LIA does in Italy. They're very useful. Yeah, Charles says ACE by DAISY can only check about 15% of what's going on in an ebook. The rest needs to be done by humans who understand accessibility in all its nuances. Excuse me. Oops. Okay, so now we're ready for the breakout room activity. What I want you to do is to write the schema.org metadata for the module 3 supplied ebook. You'll have to look through that ebook to see what it does and what it doesn't. Use the supplied PDF of what's required and what's optional. So you have a PDF that came with the module 3. It's called metadata tables. And use that to look at what's going on in that ebook and to describe it. A quick note. My thing is so slow. You know, the ebook that's provided for module 3 does not have a page list, for example. So I'm going to tip my hand there. Don't say that it has page numbers in it because it's a digital only content. It does not have page numbers. But try to work through that. Work as a group to work up a full set of values and write an accessibility summary. And then if time allows, look at the code list 196 and figure out which values you might be able to include. So, okay, off you go to your breakout rooms and good luck. Before we get underway on the next section, which is about testing and QA, I wanted to just tell you all about a project that I'm working on right now. It's called the Accessible Publishing Learning Network, and it's a project from eBook Canada. And it's filled with content written by the lovely Leah from Nels, who is so awesome, I can't even begin to tell you. Most of it's written by her, and it's designed to be a plain language resource around accessible publishing. The key piece that I think will interest most of you here is that it includes a community hub. So it's designed to be kind of a Reddit for accessible publishing people. So you go there when you have a question. It's staffed by somebody who knows a lot about accessible publishing and can help guide you through the questions. And it's a community hub, so other people can help answer the questions. You can kind of crowdsource solutions to thorny accessible publishing problems. It's not launched yet, but it will be launched sometime in July. So bookmark apln.ca and go back to it later this summer. It will be a great a great resource for all of you, especially as you're learning about this this end of the business. Okay, testing and QA. So QA stands for quality assurance, just so that you know. Some people call it QC, quality control, just FYI. Different publishing houses have different approaches to QA. This module comes with the URL for that community hub, Stephanie, is apln.ca. And it's not live just yet, just FYI. You might go there and be like, what? There's nothing here, but it will be live later. Okay, this module comes with some simple and complex QA checklists. And one of them, I'm going to pull it up on my screen. No, not that one, this one. There's one that's called annotated, and this is the one we're going to use in this session. It includes comments with links to the relevant pages on the DAISY knowledge base for every single one of these QA things that you may be checking your ebooks for. So you can use these checklists. I would dupe them and use them for every book that you're checking, especially when you're new to this. But the annotated version includes links out to learn more and to get more exact details about what's the what. Okay, so you've gone through the work to make your ebook as accessible as possible. How do you check it? As a person without a print disability, this can be complex. Testing is done in addition to using tools like Epubcheck, which we know only goes a portion of the way. In addition to using tools like Epubcheck and Ace by Daisy, which we know only goes a portion of the way to telling you where the holes in your ebooks are. As you're working on an ebook, so tweaking the CSS and the HTML, for example, you're likely opening it regularly in something like Adobe Digital Editions or Apple Books, or watching the formatting emulator that's built into Sigil. Testing for accessibility goes a step deeper than those quick visual checks. So before we dig in, I just want to point you to a couple of resources. epubtest.org is a site maintained by DAISY and a suite of testers. They regularly score reading systems and reading apps according to a number of metrics. They have several EPUBs on their site that are designed just for testing. So basic functionality, non-visual reading, visual adjustments, read aloud, media overlays, math, and extended descriptions. Those EPUBs on epubtest.org are an excellent resource for opening up and cribbing the code. So open those books up and look how those books are marked up, and then follow those examples. I will also state for the record that this workshop is for beginners. There's a lot more in-depth topics on accessible EPUB that we've really just skimmed over. But as you use the checklists, I'm certain that questions will come up. Please use the breakout rooms to ask them if they come up today. And also consider telling me what elements you'd like to learn more about. I'm in the process of creating tutorials and blog posts, and would most definitely use that information as I create my own personal to-do lists. I wouldn't be much of an accessibility busybody if I didn't try to insert myself into deeper education on accessible EPUB, would I? Okay, and then the other thing I want to point you to on the slide on the screen also points to the Flight Deck QA checklist, which is a really extensive checklist. And then the article at the bottom is on epubsecrets.com, and it's an article called Dog Fooding, also known as ebooking. It's a really excellent article that really basically says if you're going to work on ebooks, you should be reading ebooks. You should understand the reading experience, and you don't have to read them from a print disabled point of view, but understand the UX behind ebooks and use that as you create ebooks. Okay, so let me switch over to the QA checklist. The very fine folks at Nels have created these thorough checklists that will be up on eBound's APLN website soon when you have early access to them. You receive these as well as a PDF. We're going to go through those. We're going to go through these and what each item means. And I've sent two versions for you, one for your regular usage and one annotated with links out to the Daisy knowledge base. And then a quick note about assistive technologies. I'm not going to suggest that if you're serious about accessible books that you need to buy JAWS or NVIDIA. Those are both really built out screen readers for people with print disabilities. But I will insist that you familiarize yourself with screen readers and how they work. There are a couple of low-tech ways to get at this, and the best one is Thorium, which I've shown you a little bit already today. Load your ebooks up in Thorium. Thorium is a standalone desktop app. It's a free download, and it has a built-in text-to-speech function. So load your books up into Thorium and check your books with one of these screen readers regularly. Doing this will highlight small things that you may have been missing or taking for granted, and it will help you, as the EPUB Secrets article points to, it will help you eat your own dog food, so to speak. I do not want you to put on a blindfold and to try to imagine the print disabled reading experience, but I do want you to get comfortable with assistive technology so that you understand how it goes wrong and where it excels. For example, I convert a lot of poetry to ebooks, and I recently discovered that having a BR tag, so a line break tag, at the end of the line with no word space causes the word at the end of the line and the word at the start of the next line to get read as one word. This is a relatively simple error, but one that could have had an outsized impact on the reading experience. And I only discovered it because I load up my books regularly in Thorium and listen to them being read. So this is a really important piece of the puzzle. Don't be afraid of that piece. It's important. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and then we're going to go through them. I'm just going to go through the simple checklist. There's two in this PDF. As you can see, it's 5 pages. The first page is simple, and the next page goes into greater detail. And I think that's a little bit beyond the scope of today, but I want you to have some tools in your toolkit for doing QA. So the first one, is there alt text for non-decorative images? So the way to check that is to go through your ebook and look at all the images and make sure that they have alt text. If you use let me show you a quick thing. If you use a text editor like Oxygen, you can do a search for IMG tags, for image tags, and then say find all, and it will show you them all down here. And then you can look at them really quickly to make sure that they all have alt text. So there's that one. This one is a logo. This one is, this is the EPUB that you're using in this section, and the alt is doodad. I would suggest that you look closely at that in your breakout rooms because it's wrong. But all of them do have alt text, and I can see that really quickly because Oxygen is a bit more of a robust way of looking at things. I believe you can do it in Sigil as well. So let me just see if I can. We'll have to test for this, but I think you can. And we'll just say find. I don't use Sigil all the time, so I'm not sure. There must be a way to look in all of the HTML files, but I'm not sure. If I find it, make sure mode is turned from current file to alt HTML.
At the bottom, you just have current file selected.
There you go. That's why. Thank you. And so then that will turn up all of them in this book. And so you can quickly look to see if they all have alt text. Thank you for crowdsourcing that solution with me. Ensure that decorative images are properly marked up. So what does that mean? It means that if an image is decorative, that there should be no alt text in it, and it should have a role equals presentation attached to it, so that assistive technologies will be alerted that there's nothing to see here and to move along. Make sure that the book's content is the correct reading sequence. This is a tricky one, and it may seem like, well, duh, all the chapters are in the right order. But if you're using something like InDesign to create ebooks, and a book is threaded from beginning to end, and at some point in the production process, they moved around two pieces of the puzzle but kept it threaded in the original way, then it won't be in the right order. And so it's worth doing the work of checking that everything is in the right sequence. Ensure that all headings are marked up as HTML headings and cascade in the correct order. ACE will help with this because it will tell you if you have, if you're missing an H2, if you skip from H1 to H3, so that helps. Update the title elements for each document. So let's go back to Oxygen here and look at what that means. So this is the title element right here at the top. If you're using an authoring environment like InDesign, it's going to populate the title element with the name of the InDesign file. Super duper unuseful. In this case, this is a section called Taking Space. And so the title element at the top, it has that title in it. Some assistive technologies will read that title. So don't let it say, you know, this is my ebook _15. That's not a good title for your HTML. And that's what you should be checking. Ensure that links have a useful link text. So that means that your books don't have a link like click here. That's the enemy of accessibility. Click here doesn't help anybody. It means that your link is descriptive. So if you remember my link out to a long description, it said link to a long description or something similar. And then the link in the long description said link back to the chapter that you were at. Make sure that the link text is meaningful. And Kai talked about this a lot in that YouTube video that I hope you watched before today. Ensure that internal links like links from the table of contents and between footnotes and endnotes are working, and that they're backlinking as well, so that they are going back to the text. Make sure that there are language declarations in the OPF package, in the HTML element, and on language shifts. So in all three of those places. Make sure that the accessibility metadata is included and that it's accurate. Do not include MathML in your accessibility metadata if there's no MathML in your book. And that's a bit of a hint for the breakout rooms, just FYI. Ensure that all text styling and spacing comes from the CSS, not from inline styling. So inline styling is, I don't have an example of it because I never use it, but it's when you put the styles right into the HTML, like in a table row, a TD tag, you say padding equals 6 pixels or something like that. That should come from a class on the table, and that class, the definitions around the padding should be in the CSS, not in the text. If it's in the HTML, there's a potential that it could get in the way of transformability. So if someone needs to upsize the text and it has hard pixel definitions, particularly right in the HTML, it's going to get in the way. Inline styling is the enemy of accessibility. Ensure that the book opens to the cover page. InDesign, I know I keep swearing about InDesign all the time here, but it sets the text not to open to the cover page, and it makes the cover page, it attaches a bit of code in the spine that says linear equals no, so that the cover page never opens in the book. So you have to work against that and make sure that it opens to the right page. Use ARIA roles. We haven't gone into this extensively because it's a bit of next level, but make sure that if you have Epub type equals chapter at the start of each chapter, that you also have role equals doc hyphen chapter, because the Epub type equals chapter means nothing to assistive technologies. Epub type is mostly useless. You need to have the corresponding ARIA roles. Set the title page as text if possible, and if not, be sure to add alt text. A really good question, Andrea, about InDesign. And InDesign is a pain in the butt, but it's possible to, her question is, what is your preferred software to create EPUB since InDesign is so finicky? And I still use InDesign every day of my life to create ebooks because that's just where I get the content from. The key is to know how to bend InDesign to your will. And if that's something you want to learn more about, I recommend Epub Secrets. There's a lot of blog posts there that talk about that. And there are a couple of LinkedIn learning videos that go into this in depth. So you can access those videos through your local library, I bet. And that's one way to get at that information. If possible, add page navigation and a page list. If there's a print version of the ebook that you're creating, you should be adding a page navigation and a page list every single time. It may seem like a lot of work for no big payoff, but if people are reading this in a classroom setting, then they can literally all be on the same page, no matter which version or format that they're using. If people are in a book club, then they can, same thing, that they can all be on the same page. It's also one more way for people to navigate the content, and a really useful way. Don't impose, be careful not to impose your non-print disabled reading experience on print disabled people. So page navigation and page list is a lot of hoops to jump through, but it is required if you want to hit accessibility minimum standards. Make sure that you're marking up context breaks with an HR element. A lot of people just use instead of marking a context shifts or editorial breaks or thematic breaks, they're referred to in a number of ways. With an HR element, they just use a unique class on the paragraph after that gives some space before. But that means that that editorial break is only available to people who are reading it visually. People who are using assistive technologies won't understand that there's a pause there. So someone using reading the content with a screen reader, when it hits an HR element, there will be a pause, and it will be significant enough to know that there's a context break. Make sure that all text and background, even images of text, meets color contrast requirements. So that's something that ACE is going to help you find, but make sure of it. In the Peter Pan ebook that you had for modules 1, 2, and 3, there was a sidebar that didn't meet color contrast minimum standards, and that got flagged, I think, by ACE. So be aware of that. And then the advanced checklist is here. The one thing I would say is that EPUB 2 doesn't meet minimum accessibility requirements. EPUB 3 is accessible by nature and is the right format to choose in every instance. So if your book is EPUB 2, it needs to be updated to EPUB 3. There's some automated ways to do that. There's actually a really great article on Epub Secrets by Nicole Lamb, one of the facilitators here, about how to take ebooks from EPUB 2 to EPUB 3. EPUB 2 is less accessible by nature, and EPUB 3 is the correct format for your job. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of the advanced checklist, but I will send you on your way to your breakout rooms, and I'm on time for once in my life. So use these checklists to go through the supplied EPUB. It's booby-trapped. There's a couple errors in it. All of your facilitators know what those errors are. Hopefully you can find them by using the checklist to go through things. The one thing I will say is that EPUB that I provided is it's a live EPUB. It's for one of the publishers that I work for, Invisible Publishing. Please respect their copyright and not share that EPUB outside of the context of this workshop. I would be grateful for that. The publisher gave me sign off to use it for this workshop, but I'd like it if you would not share that outside of the workshop. I will put a link to the EPUB 2 to EPUB 3 article in the chat so that you have it. I'll dig it up and put it in the chat so that when you come back to the main room, it will be there for you. Good question, Eva. Okay, so go off to your breakout rooms and good luck finding all the booby traps I've laid for you.
Before we wrap up for the day, I wanted to recap that all of the links and other material that was shared in the chat today will be circulated after the event, along with recordings of all of the module lectures. You have access to all of the documents that we shared today as well, the scripts. We wanted to address a couple of the questions that came up in the chat that we hadn't. One of the first questions was from one of the breakout rooms about using language shifts on ancient languages or languages that are used in small communities that may not be covered by HTML codes. Laura, do you want to speak to that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So what I would suggest there is this. Mark up those language shifts as best you can. There's a very full set of language codes at a link that Leah put in the chat much earlier today. It covers a lot of languages. So for some Indigenous languages in Canada, you need to choose Ojibwe or Cree. There isn't like a drilled down language code for that specific Indigenous language, but still mark those with the hope that text-to-speech is going to catch up eventually, and that it will get better at that and better at it over time. It's there you go. She just put that. It's the IANA.org list of all the languages that the whoever, I'm not sure if it's the W3C, but somebody. So still code them and hope that it catches up. There will be the odd assistive technology that understands how to read them correctly. It's a bit of a hopeful gesture, but do it anyway.
All right, and our next question, is there an easy way to add print page numbers into an already published ebook that does not have them?
Nope. There just isn't. Like it's a really tedious and manual process. You need to open up the print book and put the code in at the very spot where the page breaks. It's just not easy to do. It's actually easier to go back to the source materials and reconvert it with a page list embedded, to be really fully frank. You can use regular expressions to get it into shape if necessary. But I would also say that, like, there's some EPUB 2 files that were really well made that have the page breaks marked, and you can use regular expressions to update that markup so that it is the EPUB type equals page break, role equals doc page break, so that it's the correct markup. But basically, if you have an ebook that does not have them marked, there's no easy way to do it. It's tedious and it's by hand.
I wanted to thank Laura and our facilitators so much for joining us today and lending their expertise, Laura and the modules and the facilitators in your breakout rooms. And lastly, we would really like to thank the Department of Canadian Heritage for their support for this session through the Canada Book Fund. And thanks to all of you for attending, for asking your great questions, for sharing your own knowledge, and being here to learn with us this afternoon through a marathon session. So thank you all so much for coming.